The city buzzed around him, cars honking, people rushing past with coffee cups and briefcases, yet he sat still, alone on a bench near the edge of the park. His suit was impeccable, tailored to perfection, and the silver watch on his wrist gleamed with quiet luxury. In his hand, a black coffee steamed slightly in the cool afternoon air. He wasn't here for leisure. It was simply the closest quiet place near his next meeting. His expression was unreadable, sharp, distant, and cold. A small figure stood a few steps away, hesitant. A little girl, no older than 10, wearing a faded jacket too big for her thin frame, and sneakers with frayed laces. She clutched a worn-out backpack tightly to her chest, as if it were a shield. For a moment, she just watched him, clearly nervous. Then, gathering all her courage, she stepped closer. "Excuse me, sir," her voice was soft, almost drowned by the noise of the street. The man barely turned his head, offering only a sideways glance. "Yes," she swallowed. Could you pretend to be my dad? Just for one day?" The coffee paused mid-sip. His eyebrows furrowed, more in confusion than offense. "What?" She looked down, then back up with wide, pleading eyes. "At school, tomorrow. It's family day. Everyone's bringing their parents. I don't have anyone." He stared at her, unsure whether this was some sort of strange prank. "Is this a joke? Did someone put you up to this?" She shook her head, quickly. "No, sir. I'm serious. I don't want anything else. Just someone to stand with me tomorrow. I won't ask you for anything else, I promise." For a long moment, he said nothing. The city seemed to go silent around them. He looked at her again, really looked. The tiredness in her eyes didn't belong to a child. It was something heavier, lonelier. And for the first time in years, something in his heart stirred. The little cafe on the corner was quiet, almost empty. The hum of a coffee machine and the soft clinking of dishes filled the silence between them. She sat across from him, her legs barely reaching the edge of the chair. Her hands were wrapped tightly around a cup of hot chocolate he had ordered for her. The steam curled up between them like a fragile thread, connecting two strangers from vastly different worlds. He hadn't said much since they left the park. He still wasn't sure why he agreed to come here. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe something else he didn't want to name. But now, watching the girl stir her drink nervously with a chipped spoon, he felt a strange sense of responsibility, unwelcome, yet undeniable. "So," he said finally, his voice low, "are you going to tell me why you asked a complete stranger to pretend to be your father?" She looked up slowly, her eyes uncertain. "Because I didn't know who else to ask." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't have any family? Friends? Neighbors?" "My mom's in the hospital," she said quietly. "She's been there for a few weeks. The neighbors don't even notice when I leave. My teacher asked me today if someone was coming for family day. I said yes, but I lied. I thought maybe if I just found someone nice looking, someone who looks like a real dad, maybe I could still go." He was quiet again. His fingers traced the rim of his espresso cup. "And your father?" he asked carefully. "Never met him." She said it like she was reciting a fact from a textbook. "Mom said he left before I was born. I stopped asking about him when I was 5. She took a shaky sip of her hot chocolate. "I just didn't want to be the only one standing alone tomorrow. Last year, I cried in the bathroom the whole time. I said I was sick. No one asked." He exhaled slowly, leaning back. He had faced ruthless competitors, built a company from nothing, navigated hostile takeovers, but he had no idea what to say to a child who had learned to hide pain like that. She didn't beg. She didn't push. She just waited. Quiet and patient, like she'd done it all before. And that, somehow, was the part that struck him the hardest. The grand hall of his mansion echoed with silence as he walked in, the door closing behind him with a soft, mechanical click. The warmth from the cafe had long faded. Now, it was just him and the stillness of his carefully curated home. Every surface gleamed, every object in its place, cold, perfect, untouched. He loosened his tie and tossed it on the marble counter, walking slowly through the vast living room. The city lights twinkled beyond the tall glass windows, casting dim reflections on the polished floors. From a distance, everything looked beautiful. But up close, it was hollow. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat on the edge of the leather couch, staring at the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. His mind kept drifting back to the girl's voice, the way she clutched her backpack like it was all she had, and the look in her eyes, not desperation, not manipulation, just quiet hope. A kind of hope he hadn't seen in a very long time. After a long moment, he stood up and walked down the hallway, stopping in front of a room he rarely entered anymore. Slowly, he opened the door. The air inside was still. Dust particles floated in the dim light. The room was untouched. Soft lavender walls, shelves full of children's books and plush animals, a tiny bed with a white comforter decorated in fading cartoon stars. He stepped in and looked at the framed photograph sitting on the nightstand. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, smiling with missing teeth and holding a teddy bear. His daughter. Gone. Years ago. Too soon. He reached out and gently touched the frame. His fingers trembled slightly. He had buried that part of his life under layers of work, success, noise. But tonight, the memory stared back at him, raw and real. He sat on the edge of the small bed, the old wood creaking faintly beneath him. In his mind, her laugh still echoed. But tonight, it was a different girl's voice he heard, asking for something so simple, so heartbreakingly human. He looked around the room again, then stood up and straightened his shoulders. He didn't know why he cared. Maybe he didn't want to admit that he did. But something had shifted. Just one day, he murmured to himself. One day won't kill me. And for the first time in years, he felt a purpose that didn't come from a bank account or a boardroom. The morning sun filtered through the car window as they drove through the quieter part of the city. She sat in the passenger seat, her face pressed close to the glass, eyes wide with curiosity. Everything around her felt like a dream. The smooth leather seats, the soft hum of the engine, the way the man beside her didn't speak much but didn't seem angry either. He glanced at her now and then, stealing quick looks as if trying to figure out what to say. He wasn't used to this, not the silence, and definitely not the presence of a child. Their first stop was a clothing store. Not just any store, but the kind with quiet music, polished wood floors, and staff who looked more like personal stylists. She clung to her backpack tightly as they walked in, shrinking under the attention. He turned to the clerk and said simply, "She needs something nice. For school. Something that fits." The clerk smiled warmly at the girl and led her toward the children's section. For the next 20 minutes, he sat on a small couch nearby, watching as she nervously tried on dresses, first a soft blue one, then a yellow one with a ribbon around the waist. Each time she stepped out of the fitting room, she looked at him, unsure. "This one okay?" she asked in a whisper. He gave her a small nod, then, almost awkwardly, added, "Looks good. Clean. Like a student who means business." Her face lit up at the compliment, just slightly. They chose the blue one. She didn't ask for shoes or accessories. He bought them anyway. Next, a small salon. She hesitated at the door. "Do I really have to?" "You don't have to do anything," he said. "But they'll wash your hair. Style it. Make you look like the important person you are." The woman at the salon was kind, treating the girl like royalty. As the blowdryer hummed and soft brushes worked through her hair, she watched herself in the mirror with quiet awe. She looked different, like someone who belonged somewhere. Later, they walked through the park. He bought her a snack, a warm pretzel, bigger than her hands, and they sat on a bench, the same one where it all began. "You don't talk much," she said, glancing up at him. "I talk when there's something worth saying," he replied. She grinned. "That sounds like something a real dad would say." He didn't respond. But this time, he didn't look away either. And in that moment, sharing silence, a pretzel, and sunlight through the trees, something between them began to quietly shift from strangers to something more. Something neither of them quite knew how to name yet. The schoolyard was alive with noise, laughter, footsteps, excited voices bouncing off the walls. Balloons in bright colors floated above the main entrance, and hand-painted signs read, "Family Day, Welcome." Children ran across the field holding the hands of their parents, siblings, and grandparents. Everyone seemed to belong to someone. The luxury car pulled up quietly by the curb, but the girl inside didn't move right away. She stared at the gate, clutching her small backpack in both hands. Her hair had been brushed neatly, and the blue dress she wore looked crisp and new. She looked nothing like the girl who had approached a stranger in the park just a day ago. But inside, the flutter in her stomach hadn't gone away. He stepped out first, adjusting his coat, checking his watch. He looked sharp, collected, like he always did. Then he opened her door for her, offering his hand. She hesitated for just a second, then took it. The school staff at the entrance greeted them with warm, curious smiles. Teachers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the well-known face now walking down the hallway with a little girl by his side. He didn't acknowledge the whispers. He only looked down at the child beside him and gave a small nod. Inside the auditorium, families gathered in small groups. Tables were decorated with drawings and crafts. On the wall, a big banner read, "My family, my pride." The girl led him to her class display, a board with crayon drawings of houses and stick figure parents. One drawing had only a small girl with a son above her head. Underneath, it said, "My family, me and mom. I still hope for more." He stared at it for a long time. A teacher approached. "You must be Emma's father." She looked up at him, heart racing. He answered without hesitation, "Yes, I'm proud to be here." The teacher smiled and moved on. Emma's eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly to stop the tears. She had heard those words in her dreams, but never aloud. They joined the other children and parents in the classroom. There were games, little performances, even a moment where each child introduced their family. When it was Emma's turn, she stood nervously in front of the group. "This is my dad," she said, voice small but steady. "He's really busy. But he came. Just for me." The room applauded politely. He gave a faint smile, but inside, something pulled tight in his chest. As the event wrapped up and the sun started lowering outside the windows, Emma turned to him and whispered, "Thank you, for not letting me be the only one." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You never were." And in that instant, surrounded by paper crafts and children's laughter, the role he was pretending to play no longer felt like pretend at all. The next morning, the calm didn't last. He sat at the long dining table in his mansion, sipping his coffee as sunlight poured through the tall windows. Emma's drawing from Family Day, the one with the tiny stick girl and the words, "I still hope for more," sat propped beside his phone. He hadn't moved it since yesterday. He found himself glancing at it again and again, as if her hope somehow reached across the paper and touched something inside him he thought was long buried. The silence was broken by the sharp chime of his phone. A message. Then another. Then a call. He frowned and answered. "Mr. Volkov," his assistant's voice crackled, anxious. "You're all over the internet." "What?" he said sharply. "Pictures. From the school. A teacher posted photos from Family Day. Someone recognized you. You and the girl. They're calling it, the secret daughter of the reclusive tycoon. It's trending." His chest tightened. "I'm already handling PR," the assistant continued. "But that's not the worst part. Child Welfare Services have contacted the school. They want to know who the girl is, why she's with you, if she's in danger." He stood up abruptly, the chair screeching against the floor. "She's not in danger," he snapped. "She's just," he stopped. What was she? Not his daughter. Not legally. Just a girl who asked for one small kindness. One day. But the world doesn't take kindly to blurred lines. An hour later, he sat in the small waiting area outside the hospital room where Emma's mother lay. The hospital social worker had called him after they learned about the news circulating online. She had questions. So did Emma's school. So did everyone. Emma came out of the room, her face pale. "They said someone might take me away," she whispered. "They think you did something wrong." He knelt in front of her. "You didn't do anything wrong. And I didn't either. We just," he trailed off, searching for the right words. "We just needed each other. That's not a crime." But the girl didn't look reassured. "Will I have to go to a foster home?" He didn't answer. He didn't know. The people now involved wouldn't care about one day, or a promise, or how much he had begun to care. Later that night, he sat alone in his office, the fire crackling softly behind him. For all his wealth, his power, his influence, he had never felt so helpless. He stared at the news headlines flashing across his screen. Speculation, rumors, gossip. But none of them knew the truth. That a man who had once lost a child had found a reason to protect another. And this time, he wasn't going to walk away. The courtroom was smaller than he expected. No marble columns, no dramatic lighting. Just beige walls, the hum of fluorescent lights, and rows of old wooden benches. It was quiet, 2. The kind of quiet that made people nervous to breathe too loudly. He sat near the front, wearing a gray suit that felt heavier than usual. The tie he wore had been chosen carefully, not for fashion, but for softness, calmness. Beside him sat Emma, her small hand wrapped tightly around two of his fingers. She hadn't said much since that morning. Her face was drawn, her eyes uncertain. She looked far too young to be part of a legal proceeding, and yet here she was, once again at the center of a decision made by adults. At the other table sat a representative from Child Services. The woman didn't look unkind, but she did look tired, as if she'd seen too many children, too many broken stories, and was no longer surprised by anything. There was also a nurse from the hospital who had come to speak on behalf of Emma's mother, who remained too ill to appear in person. The judge entered, an older man with silver glasses and a steady gaze. Everyone stood, then sat. The room settled. First came the facts, a summary of the media coverage, the viral photos, the questions raised about why a powerful, wealthy businessman had appeared at a public school pretending to be a girl's father. Then came the concerns, about Emma's home situation, her mother's condition, and whether the child was truly being cared for. He sat through it all, his face still, listening carefully. But inside, his heart pounded with the quiet panic of a man who had something to lose, something he never expected to want. When the judge finally addressed him directly, the room fell even quieter. "Mr. Volkov," the judge said, his tone formal but curious, "we understand that your initial interaction with this child was unplanned, even accidental. And yet, here you are. Why?" He stood slowly. Not to perform, not to impress, but because the truth deserved to be spoken while standing tall. "I was a stranger," he began, his voice steady, "until she asked me to pretend to be something I once was, a father. I said yes, thinking it would mean nothing. But it didn't mean nothing. It reminded me of everything I had lost, and everything I had to give." He glanced at Emma, who looked up at him with wide, teary eyes. She needed someone to stand beside her. "I did. And I will. Not just for a day. Not as a performance. But for real." There was a long silence. Even the judge seemed taken aback by the simplicity of the words. The nurse stood next, speaking softly about the mother's failing health, how she had asked, through tears, if this man who showed kindness to her daughter could possibly be allowed to stay in her life. The judge nodded slowly, then spoke again. "You understand what guardianship means, Mr. Volkov. This is not charity. It is responsibility. Permanence." "I understand," he said. "And I want it. With all I have." Emma's small hand reached for his again, and this time, he gripped it tightly. No matter what the judge said next, he had already made his choice. It was raining lightly that evening, the kind of soft drizzle that shimmered beneath the street lamps like falling silver threads. The city moved slower under the curtain of rain, umbrellas unfolded like blooming flowers, and cars slid gently along wet asphalt, their headlights smearing golden lines across the pavement. Inside the mansion, it was warm. Not just from the heat of the fireplace, but from something deeper, something new. The sterile coldness that had once defined the place had softened. The silence that used to dominate every corner was now broken by the soft padding of small feet, the quiet hum of cartoons playing in the background, and the gentle rustle of paper as crayons slid across coloring books on the floor. Emma lay on her stomach near the hearth, deeply focused on her drawing. Her little fingers were stained with bits of crayon wax, and her brows were furrowed in concentration. She was drawing a house, not perfect, but bright, with a tall tree, a dog, and two figures standing side by side, a little girl and a man with gray hair and a serious face, both smiling. He sat behind her in a large armchair, a book open but unread in his lap. His eyes were on her. He watched the way she pushed her hair behind her ear when it fell forward, the way she paused to think before choosing a color. It was strange how natural this felt, how quickly the emptiness had been replaced by her quiet presence. Dinner had been simple that night, soup and bread, eaten together at the kitchen island. She had insisted on helping set the table. He let her, even when the forks ended up on the wrong side. Afterward, she had asked if she could stay up, just a little longer, and he, despite his usual discipline, had said yes without hesitation. He looked around the room now and saw traces of her everywhere. A pair of small shoes by the door. A half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. A pink sweater draped across the back of a chair. None of it matched the expensive decor, and yet, it all belonged. She belonged. Suddenly, she turned and held up her drawing. "Do you like it?" she asked. He took it gently, examining every detail, the colors, the sky, the big red heart drawn above the house. "I do," he said softly. "Very much." She beamed. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're really staying, right?" He nodded slowly. "I'm not going anywhere." She crawled into the chair beside him and leaned her head against his arm. He let his hand rest gently on her back, and they sat that way, the fire crackling softly, the rain tapping against the windows like a lullaby. Outside, the world moved on, noisy, busy, complicated. But in this room, there was stillness, and warmth, and a beginning. Not of a story about a millionaire and a girl, but of a father and a daughter, bound not by blood, but by choice, by healing, and by love that asked for nothing but to stay.